Greetings everybody, I have a PhD in biology and also a bachelor's in computer science. And even though I'm a scientist, I'd like to say that I believe every single verse of the Bible, and that creation really happened literally in 6 days according to the book of Genesis. Today's topic will be about the biblical kinds and how the Bible views the origin of species. Now this video is being pre-recorded, and if you have any questions you can type them into the sidebar, and we will be available all throughout the presentation to answer your questions. I'd like to say a few words about Creation Ministries International. We are an information-based ministry. We have two goals. The first goal is to really equip and help Christians to be able to answer difficult questions about the faith, about the Bible, about origins. We also want to make your witness more effective so that you can answer non-believers and their questions, to show them that there's real evidence for the Bible and to deconstruct these mental blocks that people have which keeps them from believing in the Bible. We have a website, which is creation.com, and on our website we have more than 12,000 articles representing more than 40 years of creation research. So if you have a question, then just type it in the search bar. It's very likely that you'll get an article or some sort of resource which will answer your question. Our ministry also has a weekly newsletter called InfoBytes, and you can sign up if you go to creation.com/infobytes. The way this newsletter works is that every single week our staff looks all over the internet for interesting science articles, and we give a biblical response to it. You can also sign up if you text your email address and your zip code to the number on the screen, 470-344-4636. I'll keep this number on the screen for the next following slides so that you can sign up in that manner. Now, why is talking about biblical kinds so important? You see, in our public schools, our children are being taught the evolutionary worldview, that we all came from a single organism and that species evolve over many, many millions of years. So children get confused and they think that there's no science to back up what the Bible says. And as you can see, the statistics, even as much as a whopping 88% of our young people leave the faith by the time they get to college. Maybe you yourself know such a young person. So let's compare and contrast evolution with creation. What is evolution all about? So as you can see on the screen, evolution is an endless process of species slowly changing into one another over many, many millions of years. First, we have a single cell organism, which turns into a sponge, which turns into a fish, and then a reptile, and then a mammal, and then an ape, and then finally humans at the very end. It's important to note that evolution says that all species come from one another and that we're all interrelated, and that species arise and then they go extinct over countless intermediates and over many millions of years. Evolution is millions of years of death, disease, pain, and suffering. You might remember the saying that nature is red in tooth and claw. If you remember watching a nature show, maybe you remember the lion chasing down the gazelle and then cutting its neck, and then the poor animal bleeds to death. And so death is a very natural element of the process of evolution. But as opposed to this, 1 Corinthians 15:26 says that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. You see, God is a God of the living and not of the dead. God is not an ogre. He did not use death to create. That's why Jesus Christ rose from the dead and he conquered death for our sakes. You might remember Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. When God finishes creating everything, he says that everything that he has created is very good. It's perfect in every way. It's a paradise. No sin, no death, no suffering. And these things only came into the world as a result of Adam's sin. Let's see what Jesus has to say about origins. In Mark chapter 10, verse 6, Jesus says, "But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." So this means that humans have always been around all throughout history, ever since creation 6,000 years ago. As opposed to this, evolution says that first there was a big bang, then the earth started forming ever so slowly, and then species started evolving over countless intermediates over millions of years. And finally, sort of like a cosmic afterthought, humans only arrive on the scene at the very end of this cosmic process. But now let's take a look at what the Bible has to say about the origin of species. Genesis chapter 1 verse 24 read, "And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." Now notice that I underlined the word kinds twice because it's a key concept. You see, the Bible doesn't talk about individual species. Rather, it describes different kinds of animals and plants. We shouldn't force our modern view of science onto the Bible. Now, there's a misconception that many people may have. They think, or they've been told, that species are individual entities and that they form sort of like a lawn. And on this lawn we have little blades of grass, each representing a single species, which remains unchanged during time. Now this picture is false because it came from the taxonomist Charles Linné in the 18th century. Rather, the Bible talks about a creationist orchard. As you can see, in this orchard we have individual trees, and each tree represents a single kind, each kind covering a number of species. So for example, we have dogs, we have apes, we have birds, we have Triceratops kind, etc. Now it's important to note that according to the creation model, in each kind we have a blue line cutting through each tree. This represents the flood. This means that Noah took on board 2 of each kind onto the ark. Now let's examine one of these kinds. For example, let's take a look at the cat kind. Here we have the lion, the leopard, and the tiger. Now look at these animals. You can recognize a cat when you see one. Now this means that there's variety within a kind. There's multiple species within a kind. And species within a kind can interbreed with one another. So that means that if we take the lion and the tiger, we'll get what is known as a liger. What an interesting animal. Not too many people actually know about such hybrid animals. So species can mix with one another within a kind, but species will not mix from 2 separate kinds. You can't cross a rhinoceros with a giraffe, or a turtle with a giraffe. These animals, they simply don't breed with one another. This means that there are very real physical and also genetic barriers between animals from separate kinds. Did you know that about 10% of all animal species and 25% of plant species are capable of forming hybrids with one another? Now we've seen the liger, but if you cross a camel with a llama, you'll get a cama. If you cross a cow with a bison, you'll get a beefalo. If you cross a zebra with a donkey, you'll get a zonkey. A zebra crossed with a horse is a zorse. If you cross a goat with a sheep, you'll get a jeep. You can also cross pigs and boars. And if you cross a grizzly bear with a polar bear, you'll get what is known as a pizzly bear. And if you cross a whale with a dolphin, you'll get what is known as a whalfin. Now, some people think that if you cross animals with one another in this fashion, that these hybrid animals, they're sterile and they're not capable of breeding with one another. But that's not true. If you cross a lion with a liger, you'll get a liger. If you cross a tiger with a liger, you'll get a liger. Let's look at some even more of these animal hybrids. If you cross a coyote with a wolf, you'll get a coy wolf. If you cross a puma and a leopard, you'll get an interesting animal called a pumapard. You can also cross different species of ducks and mallards, and you'll get mullards. And if you cross a yak with a buffalo, you'll get what is known as a yakalo. Let's examine the dog kind. Did you know that in the past 200 years, animal breeders have been capable of breeding more than 400 breeds of dogs? This is hardly the evolutionary timescale, and this fits much, much better with creation. Now we've been talking about animals, but can plants also form hybrids? Let's look at Genesis 1 verse 11. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth. And it was so. So as you can see, the Bible also mentions different kinds of plants. So we can we can cross different species of strawberries. We can cross an apricot with a plum. We'll get what is known as a plumcot. We can also cross a mandarin and a red finger lime to get a blood lime. We can also cross raspberry and blackberry, and we'll get what is known as a tayberry, named after our CMI colleague Joel Tay. That's just a joke. Now we've talked about animals and plants which exist in the present, but what about animals which have gone extinct? What about dinosaurs? Did you know that creation scientists have estimated there are about 55 different dinosaur kinds, each representing about 10 to 30 different species? So let's take a look at these dinosaur species. Now in reality, researchers count several hundred species of dinosaurs. But what's with this big number? You see, when a researcher finds a new fossil, it's very many times it's fragmented, doesn't have the muscles or the skin on it. And if a researcher can find a new species of dinosaur, he'll also get more research money. So that tends to multiply the number of dinosaur species. So are these dinosaurs, are they 1 or 3 separate species? What's your guess? The thing is that if we look at the one on the left, it's a juvenile individual. The one on the right is nearly mature, and the one here on the bottom is an adult version of the dinosaur species Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis. That was a mouthful. So let's take a look at some of these dinosaur kinds. This is the Triceratops kind. And if you can notice that there's quite a bit of variety within this kind. The animals, they look similar to one another, but yet they're also different. They each have horns, this horny beak, and also this big shield-like structure around their head. If you look at the Tyrannosaurus kind, we'll see that these animals have a big snout, these short forelimbs, these large hind limbs, and a relatively large tail. There's variety within a kind. This is the sauropod kind, and as you can see that these animals have a very long neck and a very long tail, and also a large belly and large legs, very much resembling the behemoth animal described in Job chapter 38. Now let's talk about our own kind, the human species. Now if scientists found the fossils of these two men, they might be tempted in classifying these two individuals as separate species. But if you look at them, everybody knows that these two men, they're members of Homo sapiens. Now what about alleged human fossils? What about the past history of our own kind? Did ape men really exist? Let's take a look at the firstly discovered Neanderthal fossil, which was found in 1856 in Germany. Now scientists at that time, they looked at its pronounced brow ridge, and based on this brow ridge, they thought that Neanderthal was half ape and half man, a sort of transition between apes and humans. Now is Neanderthal, is he really a primitive human? Is he really a transitional link? They've actually found a number of Neanderthal-like fossils and skulls across the world. For example, in Jebel Uhud, they found a human skull with Neanderthal-like features. In Croatia, in Vindia Cave, they found another skull also having Neanderthal features. What's interesting about this individual is that they found it wearing chainmail, which is a type of armor. It must mean that this individual was a human just like us. Cro-Magnon is also a human fossil which also bears Neanderthal-like features. Now, since these skulls, since they have mixed human and Neanderthal features, it can only mean that Neanderthals and humans interbred with one another, meaning that we are one species, modern humans and Neanderthals. Let's take a closer look at the Neanderthal skull. So as you can see that on average, Neanderthals have a slightly larger skull than modern humans do. The pronounced brow ridge and also the thicker bones of Neanderthals is due to the fact that Neanderthals lived during the Ice Age and they didn't get as much vitamin D, so that's why they had thicker, more bent bones compared to us. So if we take these things into consideration, evolution says that Neanderthal was an ape man, was more primitive than us. But then evolutionists also see that because of their larger cranium, they're more intelligent than us. So this is a contradiction. Evolution is simply inconsistent. Creation makes much better sense of the evidence. Let's also take a look at some genetic evidence from Neanderthal. Did you know that they've sequenced the whole genome of Neanderthal? if you take part in the 23andMe program, it's a heredity program, they'll tell you what % of your genome comes from Neanderthal. One of my colleagues at one of my former workplaces did the test, and she found that she was 20% Neanderthal. This means that every single person on the world has part of their genome coming from Neanderthals. This is again evidence that we form one species with Neanderthals. Let's take a look at what the National Center for Biotechnology Information, or the NCBI Genetics Database, how do they classify Neanderthal? As you can see, they call Neanderthal Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. So this means that geneticists at the highest levels of science, they recognize that Neanderthals are humans just like us. We're one species. Did you know that in 2015, the American Archaeology Society came out with a book titled The Neanderthals Rediscovered? These authors are evolutionists. This has nothing to do with creationism. These authors, they really reassessed all the evidence concerning Neanderthals. They found, for example, that Neanderthals buried their dead, used medicine. They even suspect that they used aspirin-like compounds. They had dental hygiene. They used toothpicks, for example. They had complex hunting patterns. They used art and decoration. They had complex trading networks even. They made complex tools. They had music. They dived for shellfish, and many more things. So according to the saying that if it looks like a duck and if it walks like a duck, then indeed it must be a duck. So if we take a look at all these things that Neanderthals share with modern humans, the only conclusion can be that we and Neanderthals are one single kind, we're one species. So let's take another look at Neanderthals. 150 years ago, this is what scientists thought Neanderthal looked like. But now, can you see the dramatic difference? It's like this Neanderthal looks like he has a Scotch-Irish ancestry. Now, since we're talking about variation within our own kind, let's talk about different skin colors. This is a map of the different shades of skin color across the globe. For example, different people groups indigenous to Africa and also Australia have darker skin color than people, for example, who live in Northern Europe, like in Scandinavia. Because of the differences in skin color, some people think that these represent different evolutionary lineages, different major races, but nothing can be farther from the truth. You see, the thing is that skin color is coded for by a single gene, the melanin gene, which produces the melanin pigment. And the differences in skin color is really only due to the different quantities of this melanin in people's skin. So this means that we're not different evolutionary lineages, rather we all belong to the same species. We're all descendant from Adam and Eve. Now let's talk about natural selection. Previously I told you that within a kind, new species can arise. So as creationists, we believe that natural selection actually exists and that it's a real process. But natural selection does not lead to entirely new species. It does not lead to full-blown evolution. Let me explain this to you. So let's take a look at this dog here. It has medium fur. It has two gene variants, one which codes for shorter fur and one which codes for longer fur. And so let's take two of these dogs, and if we cross them with one another, we'll get 4 offspring. One has a shorter fur, 2 of them have medium length fur, and 1 of them has long fur. Let's take these 3 different fur length dogs to the Arctic, where it's very cold. So this means that only those dogs will survive which have longer fur. This means that the short fur dog and the medium fur dog will both die off. So that means that only dogs with longer fur will be able to survive in this colder environment. So if we take 2 of these long fur dogs, and if we breed them with one another, the only offspring we'll get have long fur. This means that the genes for shorter fur will be lost from the population. This means that natural selection can really only choose and pick from genes already existing in the population. Natural selection cannot bring forth new genes. That's not what natural selection is about. So how does natural selection work within a kind? How do species arise via this process? Let's take a look at the elephant kind. For example, there's the African elephant, the Indian elephant, and two extinct species of elephants, the mammoth and the stegodon. Now, the mammoth is a very well-known animal. It lived during the Ice Age when it was very, very cold. So this animal has long fur. It also has very long tusks. Now, when elephants moved into warmer areas, we would get the African elephant, which is smaller in size and also has shorter tusks. That means that the mammoth simply lost genes for wool and also long tusks. If this process continues, we'll get the Indian elephant, which is smaller in size, and it also has smaller ears and even shorter tusks. So here we can visualize the process of natural selection within a kind, bringing forth newer and newer species. Now, when animals spread out after the flood, they had to adapt to newer environments. For example, deserts or savannas or wetlands or forests. Not all species existing today were on Noah's Ark. Different kinds adapted to their environments which arose after the flood. For example, the sandcat that we see here arose when cats adapted to a desert environment. The cat's paw is furry because this is a genetic adaptation to the desert, allowing this species of cat to walk on a scorching desert sand. Now, how does this work? What's the genetics behind this? Now, there's a gene in the cat's genome which normally codes for fur. Now, there's another gene elsewhere in the genome, and its function is to block this first gene. And so that means that fur will not be expressed on the cat's paw. But think about it, what would happen if a mutation happened in the second gene? So therefore, we can remove this block. That's why the cat's paw will express fur, allowing it to walk on the hot desert sand. This is how a genetic adaptation happens in the species. Now, we've been talking about complex organisms like animals and plants, but what about microorganisms? What's the situation with more simple single-celled species? Now, have you ever heard that people say that, well, antibiotic resistance evolved in bacteria? What's the reality behind these statements? Do bacteria really evolve resistance to antibiotics? There are several ways that bacteria can acquire resistance to antibiotics. For example, if we take a look at the cell wall of the bacteria, we'll see that it has a receptor in its cell wall. And the antibiotic fits into this receptor like a lock and key mechanism. And so as you can see that if a mutation happens in the receptor in the cell wall, then the antibiotic will not be able to fit into the cell wall. It means that this bacteria will be able to survive. Now notice that the bacteria only underwent a deleterious mutation. Something broke in the bacteria. There's no new genetic information. This is not evolution. Here's another example. Now this is again the bacterial cell wall, and bacteria have a channel protein in their cell wall. And so if the antibiotic gets to the inside of the bacteria, they can use this channel protein to exude this antibiotic. That's how they get rid of the antibiotic. Now you might have heard the saying that many hands make light work. And so this channel protein gene, it might get copied into several copies. And so if we have more channel proteins doing the same job, then the bacteria will be able to exude more units of antibiotics. This is, again, another way that bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, but it's not evolution. Here's a third example. The bacteria on the left has a bit of DNA called a plasmid. This plasmid contains a gene which confers resistance to antibiotics. The bacteria on the right doesn't have this DNA. Now, bacteria are capable of communicating with one another through a channel that is known as a pilus. And so as you can see, if the first bacteria shares this special DNA with the second bacteria will also become resistant to antibiotics, just like the first one. But no new genes. This is, again, not evolution. Now, I hope that what we've covered has been interesting and edifying for you. We're almost done, but there's so many other topics that we can cover. We can talk about the age of the Earth, about fossils, or about Noah's Ark. And so I'd like to share some resources with you that you can use to equip yourself and strengthen your family's faith, and also help you be more effective in your witness. Our ministry's most effective witnessing tool is Creation Magazine. You can sign up if you go to creation.com/magazines. It has many easy-to-understand science articles for lay people. We make it especially easy for the average person to read and understand. We also have a children's section. We have interviews with PhD scientists who describe why they believe in creation as opposed to evolution. We also have a free digital version that you can share with up to 5 other people. This means that, for example, everybody in your family can get a copy of the magazine. If you've read the magazine, pass it on to other people so that they can profit from it. The Creation Starter Pack is a good way to start reading up about creation. The Creation Answers book is a very good basic apologetics tool. It contains answers to the 20 most common questions that people may ask you about creation. So if somebody asks you, what about carbon-14, or what about the Ice Age, what about Noah's flood, where did the water go? Then there's a 95% chance the answer is in this book. It's a very, very good book. I highly recommend it. Your Feeding Evolution is a best-selling creation book of all time. It refutes evolutionary theory taught at high school level, but it's also good for college level as well. When I was studying biology in Hungary, I made good use of this resource. Evolution's Achilles heel is also a very good resource. It's actually won an award at a Christian Worldview conference. In this DVD, you can listen to how 15 scientists with PhDs, how they describe the difficult points in the so-called Achilles heel of evolutionary theory in 8 areas of science. If you want, you can also buy it in book format as well. If you want to read up on human origins, then Contested Bones is a very good resource. In this book, the authors cover how different fossils and different alleged ape men really don't show any kind of evolution from ape-like ancestors. If you're interested, you can select from a number of talks on Creation Talk. All you have to do is go to creation.com and select the icon, and you can select from a number of different interesting talks that we do on several topics. You can also view these videos on YouTube, Spotify, and also iTunes. Also check out our article podcasts on our website, in which we also discuss a wide variety of topics. And finally, once again, our website is creation.com. Please do look us up today. And thank you very much for your attention, and God bless you.